Okay. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Megan Brown and I'm with MiniTube Australia, and I've got Alyssa Bischoff from Rocky Repro with us today. I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes to let those last few people join that we're waiting on. So it won't be a second and we'll get things rolling. Okay, I might kick things off now as we begin. So first of all, I will put up a little bit of a questionnaire for everyone to just get a bit of an understanding of everyone's background and where you're from, and that will help us when we're answering questions and things for you today to tailor them a bit more to your individual situation. So I'll just put some poll questions up for you. The first one you will see come up on your screen is just a location poll. So if you just click on the answer where you're coming from today. And I'll give that a little bit of time. Okay, so a couple more to answer, we're almost there. I'll shut that one now. Okay, so we've got a few from Queensland, some from New South Wales, WA, so there's a bit of a mixture there. All right, the second question that we'll put up for everyone is looking at what your involvement with bulls and breeding is. So you commercial producer, seed stock, vet. Give that a little bit longer. Okay, I think most people have answered that now. So also I've got mostly seed stock producers, a couple of commercial producers and some consultants as well in that one. And the final question I'll put up for everybody is just some background on your experience with assisted reproduction, if you've done any before, if you haven't done any at all, and that'll just give us a bit more of an idea of where everyone's currently sitting. Okay. All right, so I'll finish that one now. So it looks like most people have got some experience and there's a couple that haven't got any, so that's all right. Very good. All right, just a bit of housekeeping as well today. You'll see that your microphones are muted, and if you could mute your or your videos, if you could turn those off as well, it just makes things a bit easier for the connection when we're doing these webinars. If you've got any questions at all throughout the webinar, if you wave your mouse over the screen, you'll see down the bottom there's a little bar of options you can choose from. If you click on the chat box, there'll be an option for you to put questions in there. We'll try and answer those questions towards the end, just to keep it flowing pretty quickly for everybody today. So with that, I will kick off our presentation. If you want to share that one, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Rightio. So today we're looking at rebuilding your herd and the bull factor involved with that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Brown and I'm the Northern Australian Regional Manager for Minitube Australia. Minitube is a globally run, family-owned company and we specialise in animal reproduction. We decided to do these series of webinars because currently in different parts of Australia there's either a lot of rebuilding about to start happening or there will be sort of in the couple of months down the track. So with that comes a lot of investment tied up in it and a lot of capital. So we wanted to be able to put together a bit of a reference point for people to use when looking at rebuilding. And we've already had 2 webinars. The first one was looking at setting breeding objectives for rebuilding and matching breeding systems to those goals. And the second one was looking at breeder herd management and running successful AI programs to utilise that particular technology in herd rebuilding. So those 2, if you hadn't signed up to those, are available on the CattlePlan Facebook page and YouTube page. So you can go back and have a look at those. But today I've got our guest speaker with us, Dr. Alyssa Bischoff from Rocky Repro. She's the veterinarian for the collection centre, and I'll let her introduce herself now. Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Bischoff, as Megan said. I've been a vet for 4 years, and a year of that has been at Rocky Repro. I've always had an interest in reproduction, so it's great to finally be able to be doing that in my career. For those that don't know, Rocky Repro is a collection centre. So we can have bulls come on site or semen sent to us, and we're able to process that for use in future programs, whether they're AI or ET or IVF. Everything's done in-house. We've got our own morphology lab and our own processing and freezing area. So it's a great centre. It's quite busy at this time of year, so it's good. So we'll get started. So we're obviously, as Megan said, talking about the bull factor to rebuilding your herd. So just a quick agenda of what we'll go through today. So we'll do a quick talk on preparation of your bull for breeding season, semen quality assessment and what's involved there, different considerations if you're going to collect your bull, the impacts for AI and how your bull is involved in that, and just a few extra little notes. So just a few take-home messages that just want you guys to remember throughout this presentation. So the first one is that preparation and feed is important. If you don't have a bull that's healthy and ready to work, then there's no point using him. You need to consider motility, morphology and density all together when you're looking at your semen quality and freezing ability. A semen test is a point in time, so I just need everyone to remember that things can change overnight. So just remember it's at a point in time those results are useful for. Multiple morphology defects can occur due to different reasons and at different times in the spermatogenesis cycle, and I'll go through this more later. And as I mentioned at the start, Rocky Repro can offer all of this to you. So we can give you general advice, we can do all your semen testing for you, and we can do freezing of your ejaculates. So to start off with, I'll just give you a background on the physiology. So this is the sort of boring theory bit of the presentation. So spermatogenesis is your sperm life cycle. And as it says there, it's the production of your spermatozoa after multiple cellular transformations from within the seminiferous epithelium. So sperm start as round cells and they go through many different stages to produce that elongated sperm cell that we will see down the microscope. So on the picture to the side, you can see it's sort of indicating different things. So that seminiferous tubule, that's actually made up of 5 to 7 layers of germinal cells. There's some other cells around there called Sertoli cells, and they support and nourish those germinal cells. So during each cycle, spermatogonia, so the primordial cell, undergoes 6 mitotic divisions to form your first spermatocyte. So mitosis is when the cell divides into 2 daughter cells, and these daughter cells have the exact same number and kind of chromosomes. Your primary and secondary spermatocytes then undergo meiosis to form spherical spermatids. Meiosis is when the cell divides into 4 daughter cells, and all of those have half the number of chromosomes. Those spermatids then undergo metamorphosis, which is when they that haploid there on the picture, that's when they start to develop their shape. So you get your head developing, your tail developing, your chromatin condenses, and all the DNA gets ready to be used for fertilization. So as successive generations of sperm develop, the cells are pushed through those layers into the lumen, and then eventually, through the tubules eventually into the lumen. Once they're released, they then exit the testes via efferent ductules and through the epididymis, where they undergo further maturation, which is basically just preparation for fertilization. So within the testicle itself, the sperm takes 61 days, and then it's another 11 to 13 days in that epididymis. So as you can see, it's quite a long life cycle. So a sperm is made up of 3 major components: a head, a midpiece, and a tail, and these all have specific functions. So the head is what actually penetrates your egg, and that's where your nucleus and all your DNA and your chromosomes are contained. The midpiece and your tail is what gives the sperm cell energy and the ability to move. So your tail actually propels the sperm cell forward by flagellating or twisting back and forth. Throughout this cycle, you need multiple different hormones to be able to produce these. So you've got testosterone, estrogen, FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is luteinizing hormone. LH is really important because it's what stimulates your testosterone production. And FSH is important as it acts on the Sertoli cells to stimulate the spermatogenesis. And the 4 of them all together interact in positive and negative ways to increase and lower concentrations throughout the body and just cause a feedback cycle. So throughout this whole spermatogenesis or sperm life cycle, the sperm cells are very susceptible to damaging effects. Some are more susceptible than others. So things that are closer to the basement membrane aren't as susceptible as spermatids that are right there near the lumen and where they're undergoing that shape or the maturation into their shape. Anything that relates to oxidative stress anywhere in the body will cause an impact on this development. So these can be things like pyrexia, which is basically an increase in temperature, inflammation, infections, low testosterone, toxins, medication, genetics, nutritional deficiencies, and any sort of change in the environment. So yeah, all of that will affect how the sperm develops and if any defects occur. And just a little side note that onset of maturity actually varies, and that can vary because of breed or poor nutrition or the environment. And it can be anywhere from 9 months up to 24 months. And maturity is defined as when a bull is actually able to produce enough cells of fertilizable quality. So that's generally about 50 million cells per mil. That's a minimum. So we'll just talk through now on preparation. So as most of you know, body condition scoring is really important. There's actually been a lot of studies to show the strong link between your body condition and reproductive performance. So if a bull isn't around at that 3 to 3.5 out of 5 condition scoring, you're going to have poor fertility. So whether that's related to weight loss or they're too fat and so you're having temperature changes. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Vaccinations are important. So our major ones there, we need them protected for ticks if they have sort of no tick resistance in their genetics. Pestivirus, 3-day Vibrio leptospirosis. Now this one's really critical because that is a zoonotic disease and we don't need lepto spreading through herds and then putting yourself or your workers at risk. And then all our clostridiols are also quite important. So with vaccinations, standard protocol is always there. Give them 2 boosters, preferably 4 to 6 weeks apart, but there have been studies to show that as long as those 2 boosters are given in a 4 to 6 month period, they're still effective to get that immunity working, and then repeat that every year to make sure that their immunity levels stay quite high, because a lot of these vaccinations are based on cell memory. So we just need to keep exposing them to those diseases. And then as part of your preparation, just make sure the rest of your physical evaluation is normal. So This is common sense. As most of you know, if those legs and feet aren't good for conformation, you've got swelling or you've got sore, overgrown toes, which will cause sore feet, your bulls will be lame, so they won't be walking to the females, or they won't be interested in mounting. And you need to make sure that both front and back legs are of good conformation and have no swelling. So those back legs will take a lot of the weight when the bull is mounting, but once he's finished serving the female, he will then come backwards and land quite heavily on his front feet. So both of those need to be looked after. Penises, we need to make sure that there's no warts to spread that through the herd, that he's able to extend it completely. There's no deviations or frenulums. That means he can't actually protrude into the female as far as he needs to. With our eyes, they do a lot of watching of the female, so just make sure they're not blind in both eyes, or there's no trauma or things like that. We need to make sure that the testicles are of good tone and good size. So too big or too small have detrimental effects, too firm, too soft have other issues. And then we also need to make sure that all the accessory sex glands inside aren't swollen or they aren't underdeveloped or anything like that, as they're all crucial for your sperm production and the fluid that the sperm sits in. Right. So with feed, oh, sorry about that. It's important that a balanced diet is fed to your bulls. So know your area's nutritional deficiencies and cater to that. And keep in mind that that can vary paddock to paddock. So because we need balanced nutrition, sometimes you might need to supplement, whether that's with a wet lick, a dry lick, or dry forage, anything like that. If you're unsure about things, you can talk to MLA reps, nutritionists, and they can help you figure out what your property needs. But just factor in the impacts of what you're doing. So if you're feeding too much of something that's high in calcium, that can have negative effects. If you're feeding something that's too high in just roughage and they're not getting extra protein that they need, that will obviously impact growth and development. And the big thing that I just want to let everyone know is that, yes, grain's great for your protein, because we need protein for the growth, but too much will increase your fat around the scrotum, and that will impair thermoregulation, and then that can lead to morphology defects. So yeah, as we said, protein energy is really important for that body condition score that we talked about at the start, but you need a good balance so that they're not over fat. Your macronutrients need to be there, so phosphorus, calcium, magnesium. A lot of Australia is deficient in phosphorus, so just get that checked out and, as we said, supplement if needed. Now, there haven't been a lot of studies that say there are definite needs for micronutrients, but there has been enough studies to prove that a deficiency in any of these micronutrients will lead to an anemia, a lack of appetite, weight loss, which then obviously has secondary effects on your fertility. So if your bull's not eating, losing weight, poor quality in your sperm because he's under stress. And that stress will then impact your DNA damage on your sperm cells. There have been quite a few studies to show that selenium is quite beneficial to spermatogenesis. So this all is involved with preventing the effects of the oxidative stress. So some of these nutrients will help bind with the negative toxins as such that are produced when your body is under stress. And just a little note there that if anything's underfed, you'll obviously have impaired body growth, which will delay your puberty and will actually impact the development of endocrine systems and reproductive tracts. There has been quite a few studies to actually show that feeding up to 12 months post-weaning, so from birth to 12 months post-weaning, is critical. So in bulls, that's where you're actually getting the laying down of all your Sertoli cells, which are crucial for your sperm development, and that's shown to be indicative of what size the testes will grow to in future. So anything sort of fed high energy diets past the 12 months weaning didn't really have much positive impact. It was more that sort of 3 months of age to 12 months post-weaning. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you are doing all your feeding. So just a little note here that it's important that all your management is completed 8 weeks before and after joining. So that means make sure all your vaccinations are up to date, make sure that you've got your feeding program all sorted and organised, make sure that any hoof trimming or anything else like that that you wanted to do, that is all done before you even think about joining. The reason for that is it limits the stress and the impacts on your sperm. So as we said earlier, that's 61 plus 13 days. That roughly works out to be 8 weeks. So if you complete all your management, all your stress, or you're running through the crush, that means when you go to do your joining, all those potentially defective sperm should have completed their life cycle, have been ejaculated, and you should be right to go with some good fertile sperm. So now we'll talk about what's involved with the assessment of semen. This little video here is just a quick video to show you what I see down my scope in the field. So I'll just play that again for you. That's actually a nice sample there, lots of moving. So when I'm looking at the sperm down the scope, we're looking at motility. Now, when we say motility, we actually mean forward movement, because cells can be motile, but they're just moving in circles. And those are no use to us because they're never going to get to the egg. So we assess that forward motility out of 100%. The higher is better. And you want to make sure that those cells are moving under their own propulsion. So sometimes with really dense ejaculates, when you put your drop to look at it under the microscope, it's all swirling and bumping each other, so it looks like more is motile than what it actually is. And the speed of what they move isn't critical, it's just as long as that they're moving forward 2 of their body lengths in sort of a 1 to 3 second time frame, depending on how cold the sample is. In the field, I can also do a quick morphology assessment, but generally that's better to be sent back to a morphologist in a lab because they have a much high-powered microscope, and I'll show you some of those soon. And the other thing is density is important. It's not as crucial as the other two, as if a bull's just ejaculated before he's come into the crush to be collected, his density will obviously be quite low. But as long as there is sort of a minimum of that 50 million cells per mil, it should be pretty good. So if any of these aren't of passing quality, so your motility might be, say, down 40% or lower, your morphology might not have come back anywhere near 60% normal, or your density is super dilute, it's always ideal to retest. Give the bull every chance that you can. And as we mentioned earlier, you want to wait that 6 to 8 weeks to make sure a full cycle is completed. Other thing that we assess is our PMMN cells. So these are progressively motile morphologically normal cells. These are the ones that will actually get you a conception. So they're the ones that are moving forward, that are perfectly normal in morphology. And to factor that out, we need to multiply that by the density to figure out how many we actually have in an ejaculate. So that's a calculation that we do quite regularly when we're assessing samples for freezing and when we do our post-thaw checks of straws that we've frozen. So I'll go through morphology now. As I'm sure most of you know, infertility is obviously linked to increased number of abnormal sperm. And as mentioned earlier, this can occur at any stage in the spermatogenesis cycle, and that includes when the sperm is sitting in the epididymis undergoing that final maturation. So as mentioned earlier, it's affected by anything that causes oxidative stress. So that can just be stress of transport, stress of a diet change, or a sudden drop in a nutrient that they need. Trauma, so being kicked or sitting down on their testicles for too long and actually crushing them. Fat, insulating it and causing issues with thermoregulation. So the reason that I keep sort of pushing that is your testicles are kept at 4 degrees cooler than the rest of the body. So when the testicles heat up, there's an increase in metabolic activity. but there isn't an increase in your blood flow to help cool those testicles down. So when you've got all those layers of fat around, it actually prevents the sort of just natural cooling air around from helping reduce the temperature in those testicles. So that's a big one, as that will cause quite a few defects. And our defects can be broken down into compensable and uncompensable. So compensable defects are ones that won't impact the fertilization ability and embryonic development, because these ones don't reach the egg. So you can sort of increase your density of the ejaculate or the straw that you're using to compensate for this. However, uncompensable defects are ones in which the sperm cell still reaches the egg, will cause fertilization of some sort, but an embryo won't develop. So these ones are quite concerning, as you're often losing a breeding cycle in your females, and this will just delay your calving time. So here's a quick split of the defects. There's 7, 8 major categories of your defects, but within that there's lots of little variations. So these are some of your major ones. So yeah, that's just self-explanatory. So I'll now show you some pictures and talk a bit more about them. But first, I'll just remind you what I look at down the scope in the field. So as you can see, there's very not much detail. I can just see that the general shape is okay. The reason I just want to let you guys know this is when you go do your morphology, those sperm cells are now significantly increased in magnification under the special microscopes that they use. So in field, we can give you a general idea of morphology, but to get a true indication of how fertile and how your bull is going, then yeah, you do need a morphology sample. So as you can see here, this one is quite dense. There's lots of cells overlying each other, but all of these sperm cells have a nice rounded shaped head. There's no dints in it. There's nothing sort of funny looking in the top of the head. And then it goes down to a nice smooth mid piece and down to a smooth tail. So I'll see if I can point that out for you. So nice round shape, and then we've got a little mid piece, and there's a little dint in here where the mid piece ends, and then that's the rest of your tail. So you want it all to be smooth and continuous. So these ones here, these are our coiled tails here. So we've got a head, mid piece, and then the tails are bending on themselves. These obviously aren't going to move in a forward motion, so they're no major concern for us unless they're in huge numbers. And these ones here are DMRs. So that mid piece is actually quite bent, and then the tail curls up on itself. There's a few here. These cells will often just go around in a circle. They can't move in a forward motion. The DMRs are due to issues in your epididymis. So quite often there's a stress, you get a sudden increase in cortisol, which means a decrease in testosterone. So it means that the fluid that these sperm cells are sitting in doesn't have the right nutrients for them, doesn't keep them happy, so they sort of bend up in shock. Thankfully, this is one that generally you can recover quickly. So if you just remove that stress to the bull, then generally these will go away in sort of two-ish weeks, which is pretty good. With the tails, as I said, they're no major issue, but you can get other tail issues such as accessory tails, so extra ones. This is quite often a genetic issue, but the concern there is that they might carry extra chromosomes, which will impact, obviously, your embryo development and probably not have a calf at the end of it. So here we have flattened acrosomes. As you can see, the top of that sperm head is nice and flat. That's not ideal because that impacts how the sperm cell and egg interact when you go to fertilize. It doesn't penetrate and form an embryo, so it's not ideal. These ones here, the proximal droplets. So you can see the little bubble there underneath the head. During normal spermiogenesis, that droplet will actually slowly head down the mid piece, and when the sperm cell is ejaculated, it will actually completely come off the tail. And that's good because it's not, just think of it in this analogy, that's holding a bubble over the top of the head. So that means that that little bubble over the top of the head will prevent the sperm cell from penetrating the egg. So it's really important that those little proximal droplets are shed. They are a sign of immaturity. So whether that is the bull hasn't completed puberty or the bull is quite stressed and he's producing a lot of sperm cells at a high rate and just sort of pumping them out when they haven't undergone maturation properly. And this one here is a big one. So SAVs are single apical vacuoles. So I don't know if you can see, but on these sperm cells, there's lots of little dots across the top or across the equatorial region. Now these aren't any good because that means there's damage to the sperm head and most likely to the DNA within that sperm. So these craters will allow the sperm to penetrate the egg, but you won't have any embryo development. These are caused by many different things. So hormone imbalances, toxins, temperature issues, there can be genetic components to that. These ones, if you have them in high number or with other defects, this often means your bull is infertile and there's a very poor prognosis for it to return back to good fertility. So as you can see, there's some pretty cool looking defects. They're not ideal, but the only way you can see them is under a high-powered microscope. And just on a side note, we've got a couple of detached heads here, which when they're in high number, we call that a rusty load. And that's basically that instead of the bull cleaning himself out regularly, everything, all this sperm that he's making is just accumulating in the epididymis, and that's obviously not ideal because it will die in there. It's not ejaculated. So just a reminder that results from a semen sample are from a point in time. We can test him crush side and he'd be great, walks out, gets in a fight, his testicles get damaged, and if you go to test him or use him 6 weeks later, there's likely to be damage there. And yeah, results can change daily or weekly depending on what the bull experiences during the production and maturation of those sperm cells. And now, oops, sorry, just genetics. The reason it's important to consider your bull during the whole herd rebuilding process is because you can actually play and manipulate with some of your genetics. So whether that's you go and buy a new bull to put in over your herd and he can bring in new genetics, new EBVs if you're looking at increasing or changing that within your herd. The other thing that's important is you can then put a particular bull with particular females. So you might be wanting to increase birth weight, you might be wanting to increase scrotal size, things like that. So it is important that you've got a working bull if you're going to use those. And then the other thing you can do is you can collect your bull for use in AI, ET, IVF, any of those sorts of things. So just consider that he's in good working order for that so you can manipulate the genetics within your herd. So as I mentioned, Rocky Repro is a collection centre. We collect samples on site, whether the bulls are there with us just for the day or the bulls are there with us for a long time. And other vets, as well as myself, will go on farm and can collect on farm and send back to Rocky Repro for processing. The thing just to keep in mind is that we actually have quite high standards with our freezing process compared to what you get crush side. So a bull that's got 80% motility crush side is great for use in herd. You know that those sperm cells are going to be deposited straight away into the female and go do their job with the egg. However, with freezing, the sperm go through quite a few temperature drops as well as other liquids and extenders get added to them. So it's actually changing the environment that those sperm cells are sitting in. So there is quite a likely chance that that 80% motility is actually going to drop considerably once it's been frozen and we check it post-thaw to see that it has made it through the process. So yeah, Rocky Repro has quite high standards of what we want that motility to be before we even go through that process. knowing all of that. And we also make sure that the morphology is quite high, because as I mentioned earlier, with our PMNN cells, we want to make sure that we have quite a number of good fertile cells in a 1/4 ml straw for you. So things that will influence that ejaculate and how good it is travel. So that's whether the bulls actually had to travel a long distance to get to us, or unfortunately sometimes once we've collected a sample on farm, you put it on freight. When it gets to us, just sometimes traveling in that artificial environment is not great for the sperm cells. Heat, so that's heat stress impacting the bull, as well as actually temperature to that ejaculate. So within the testes, the sperm is sitting a little bit lower than 36 degrees. So we want to make sure that when we collect that sample, we don't then make the temperature go up or go down. And then, as mentioned earlier, grain can impact our morphology, which will then impact whether the sample will be able to be frozen, and age. So as bulls get older, they can gain more defects, or cells can just be not produced to the same quality when they're younger. Just like everything, your body starts to shut down. But also young bulls, if they're sort of pushing cells out quicker than they need to, the sperm cells won't have undergone complete maturation. So then there'll be defects there because they're too premature, basically. Things for you guys as bull owners to consider if you are going to go down the path of collecting your bull is, do you want the straws that are produced for use in domestic or export? We can do export processing, but the bulls will need to undergo a lot of health testing and quarantine so that we can meet requirements of the countries that will be importing that semen. And then also need to consider whether you want your collection to happen on farm or in centre. So yeah, as I said, Rocky Repro can house quite a few bulls there, which is great. Any wounds, infection or trauma to the bull, mostly on the scrotum, penis, prepuce, will impact your collection. So if he's got a big gash up his prepuce because he's just had it out and he's walked along your fence, that will actually cause red blood cells, infection cells to be in your ejaculate, which means it's not great for processing and it won't be great for use in AI. The other thing, as we mentioned earlier, is that's then going to have some sort of stress on the bull, which will impact your sperm quality. And people often collect for different reasons. So some people use it as like insurance. So just having a few straws of a really good bull on hand is great for if something ever happens to this bull or he unfortunately dies. Or the other thing is it's good just to have there if your bull gets sold. And the other thing is you can collect your straws to sell. So that's another income avenue for your business. So with AI, it's really important that you do check the quality of that sperm first. So a lot of processing centres are giving reports with the straws, which is great. You know what it's thawed at, motility it's thawed at, you know what its morphology is like, and that helps you and your AI technician determine if you want to use half a straw or a full straw, 2 straws, things like that. And it also means that you know that the quality you're putting into your females in this big, expensive, time-consuming AI program is worth it. There's no point going through all of that stress to put in average quality sperm and end up having very poor conception. Sorry. The other thing with using your collected bulls in an AI program is it's a great genetic investment. So often the cost of a straw or cost of 50 straws is a lot cheaper than buying a brand new bull. Yes, you do have to factor in your drug costs and time costs, but it gives you that genetic gain much quicker than using a bull and letting him sort out his dominance or issues in the herd and figuring out who his sort of female group is. It also means that you can have a tighter calving interval. So as we said earlier, if you've got a bull that's got poor sperm quality or he ejaculates with morphology defects, they penetrate the egg, then you're going to miss a cycle if there's no no embryo development there. So using good quality straws will help with that. And the other thing, just to sort of watch this space, is there is sex semen out there. We are working on using that a lot more in beef, but it's a bit hard because the number of cells in that is much smaller. So watch this space as we work on improving that and using that in beef to make it as effective as it is in dairy cattle. So just some other considerations to keep in the back of your mind. Some aspects of sperm quality are heritable. There is a lot of studies going on at the moment to prove these, but at the moment it's looking like terrible morphology can actually be heritable. So if you've got a bull that's repeatedly giving you bad morphology samples, I'd look at maybe getting him out of your herd. Age, as we said earlier, young bulls versus old bulls versus sort of middle-aged bulls will impact your morphology defects, the speed and your density of those ejaculates. Scrotal size. So bigger is not necessarily better. As we mentioned earlier, bigger can be related to a whole heap of being fed grain, and so there's a lot of fat. However, if there's minimal fat on that bull and they have bigger scrotal circumferences, that's great because that means you have an increased number of Sertoli cells, which helps with increasing your number of sperm cells in an ejaculate. The other thing to consider with your scrotal length is, do you want really low dangly scrotal cell testes, which will be great for thermoregulation, so they're not near the body, they're sort of being able to be cooled down there, or are we going to worry too much about trauma, which then obviously, as we said, has impacts later down the spermatogenesis cycle. Tone is quite important. If you have testicles that are too soft or too firm, that often leads to or indicates that degeneration has happened. Degeneration is a change in your sperm cells damage to your sperm cells, or sperm producing cells, which means the cells produced aren't as good. This can be reversible, but sometimes if the damage or degeneration is too severe, you get quite a lot of fibrosis, which means Sertoli cells that could be helping produce more sperm cells actually all scarred up and no use. So it's quite important that when you do assess, you're checking your tone as well. The worst enemies of sperm is pretty much everything but itself. So any sort of cleaning chemicals, any water, any urine will slow your motility or kill it completely. Any changes in your temperature, so too hot, too cold, too suddenly, will actually kill it, and direct light will kill it as well. So these little sperm cells are quite sensitive, and we really need to work on keeping the bull as happy as possible so he's making good sperm cells. And then when we do go to collect it, we have to be really careful with what we do with that ejaculate. Dominance doesn't necessarily equal libido and good fertility. So sometimes dominant bulls are too eager and they're actually serving females before the females are ready or before their own sperm cycle is ready. And so if they're going around just serving anything and everything, they're going to be making that rate of spermatogenesis speed up, which won't help with giving good cells that have gone through the maturation process properly. As we mentioned earlier, that body weight and body condition score is important. So we want them of that good body condition score. So if they're too heavy, the sooner they lose weight, the better for your sperm quality and the quicker it will improve. However, if you drop their weight too quickly or you change their diet too drastically, that's a stress which will affect other things. And as the slide there says, that once you get your body weight to a good body weight and your body condition score comes down, then the fat around that scrotum or in the scrotum will actually start to decrease, which then you'll get your sperm quality increase. And it's always a good idea to quarantine any new bulls you bring on property just to make sure that they don't bring any diseases in through your herd, so make sure you vaccinate, do all your management first, and always test them too to make sure that they're of use to you. So just a reminder of everything that we've talked through right there. So does anyone have any questions?
Thanks for that, Alyssa. I'm just having a look. Currently, there's no questions there, but I've got a couple just from listening to that presentation. That was a really good overview of the bull collection process and the importance of managing the bull for your joining period. The first one I just wanted to see if you'd be able to give us an overview of is the actual collection process. So when you bring them in for freezing.
Yep, right. So when we collect a bull on farm, we'll do our motility assessment, and then what you do is you extend it out with antibiotics and other nutrition. So there's egg yolk in there, there's also glycerol in there to help with the freezing process. So you start extending it out. Then once we get the sample from farm back into the lab checks that it's survived that transport process. They'll do the morphology on it then. And then what we do is we start, well, during that transport back, you start cooling the sperm down. So you want the sperm to go from body temperature down to about 4 degrees, nice and slowly. So that gradual decline helps the sperm eat all those nutrients in there as well as stay happy. Once it's at that 4 degrees, we then straw it up into our straws, and then the straws will go into some liquid nitrogen to be frozen. So it actually sits in vapor, which is minus 192 for 8 minutes, and then they'll drop down to minus 196 when it's in the actual liquid itself, and that's where we then store it. Once we've done our freezing, we'll then pull the straw out and warm it back up to body temperature. So that's a quick increase. So the 4 degrees in the fridge down to the freezing of minus 132 is quick because we don't want ice crystals to form. And then it's quick from the minus 196 back to the 33 degrees. Once again, so ice crystals don't form, and we do a post-thaw check then.
Thank you. That's a good overview of everything. And with your, another question here, with your different morphology defects that you have, if you have a bull that has several different defects going on, what sort of prognosis does he have as a sire for your herd?
Yep, right. So with your defects, it's always good to do your retest 6 to 8 weeks later to see if the threshold levels of, sorry, not the threshold, the counted levels change with those defects, because some things will go away with stress, some won't. However, if repeatedly you're getting the same defects or you're getting same combinations of defects, that can lead to poor prognosis. So in older bulls, if they repeatedly have vacuoles and proximal droplets, that's really a bad sign. That means there is a bit of damage to that testicular tissue, and they're not going to recover. However, young bulls often going through stress with sale preparation or traveling property to property, they'll vary with defects. So 1 week you test them, they might have high proximal droplets, and then another week you test them and they might have DMR. So as long as things even out and eventually in the end give you a good result, that's great. But if you're sort of hitting 3 or 4 retests and you're getting the same defects over and over again, or the levels of defects are increasing, so you might start at, say, 10% proximal droplets, but then the next test you're at 30% proximal droplets, that's not ideal. That's generally heading towards not a great prognosis.
Okay, yeah, so it's more about the consistency of those results rather than that point in time for that one particular test. Yeah, that's fair enough. And I think the last thing that I noted there too was with your scrotal circumference, when you were talking about the scrotal circumference, if, for example, you've got a yearling bull that has, at that point, small scrotal circumference, is that sort of the end of the line for him, or how do you manage that?
That's a difficult one. So as I was saying, sort of around that 3 to 5 months of age is when your scrotal size is determined. but that's determined by the number of your Sertoli cells within that testicle. So if the bull's just poor nutrition, he hasn't been putting on weight, but he's got the number of Sertoli cells there is the potential for a couple of months down the track on some good food, that scrotal circumference will increase and get to above the threshold for his age limit. But important period, sort of just pre-weaning, he hasn't been having that good nutrition, he hasn't laid all down all those cells, he's not likely to grow in scrotal circumference. So I would say, just from my perspective, if sort of at 15, 18 or 20 months, when you're retesting those scrotal sizes, if he is still well under his threshold for his age, I would say probably best to cull him, as he's not going to grow in size, and we know that that scrotal circumference is quite heritable and will impact traits of the offspring. So it's a difficult one, but yeah, that's my guidance.
Thank you. That's good. I think that was all the questions I had there for you, but yeah, thank you very much for joining us today for our session, and I hope that's answered a lot of questions for people with the bull collection process and how to manage your bulls. And so thank you everyone else for joining us for our talk. This talk has been recorded, so we will make that available for everyone that has signed up today, and for those that couldn't actually make it at this time slot, so that everyone will get that in an email link soon. And it will also be available alongside the previous two presentations on the CattlePlan YouTube page and the Facebook page as well. So, so keep an eye out for those. But thank you, Alyssa, for your time, and everyone for joining us.